Final Fantasy VII was a sprawling adventure across the planet of Gaia under an impending crisis, but Final Fantasy VII Remake homes in on the iconic city of Midgar and tells a story that expands upon the events that take place within it. Given this focus on Midgar, there is a discussion to be had if this really should have been titled Final Fantasy VII Remake. I personally don't think so, but this video is not going to be about all that. This is not a video about which version you should play. This video is really more for fun by comparing and contrasting two different games with some similar locations. Thinking of these games as separate entities is how I recommend you view them despite the name. Final Fantasy VII Remake is supplemental to Final Fantasy VII. It is not trying to be a replacement or make it obsolete. In this video, we're going to take a look at Midgar's Sector 6 featured in both of these games and use it to illustrate how the modern Final Fantasy VII Remake retells the events of the late 90s Final Fantasy VII and reinterprets elements from the story, combat, music, and progression. We'll begin with when Cloud sneaks out of Aerith's house so he can get back to Sector 7 through Sector 6. On his way to Sector 6, Aerith cuts him off and offers to escort him herself. After getting to the end of Sector 6, they take a break at Green Park. Aerith inquires about Cloud's rank in Soldier. After a flash, Cloud answers First Class. Aerith remarks on how Cloud is the same rank as her first boyfriend. Cloud asks who, but she doesn't answer. Suddenly, the gate to Sector 7 opens and in comes Tifa on a chocobo carriage, driven by a nameless NPC with a strikingly familiar design, heading for Wall Market. Aerith is first to take off for Tifa as she knows how unsafe Wall Market can be.
What are you doing here?
Waiting.
Why?
Because I'm not sick of you yet.
Lead on then.
With pleasure. Cloud?
Now, let's interject with what's been changed. Final Fantasy VII Remake explores and expands upon many things that were either never covered or merely implied in Final Fantasy VII. For example, Aerith informs Cloud on how Wall Market came to be.
Folks started pouring in from all over. Business was booming, money was flowing, which attracted the attention of some guys who didn't much care for the law.
Now there isn't any.
Right. But instead of trying to solve the problem, the government decided to just wall it in.
Now, let me show you the entirety of Sector 6 in Final Fantasy VII. Sector 6 in Final Fantasy VII Remake took me almost an hour. In Sector 6, you walk through the collapsed highway tunnel, fight some enemies, and are faced with a couple of puzzles. During all this, Cloud and Aerith's relationship is given exposition. While this is an example of how Final Fantasy VII Remake fleshes out its characters, it's also an example of how some areas drag on a bit too long with how they're repurposed and expanded. Now in Final Fantasy VII, you also walk, fight enemies, and try to figure out how to look at this background pretty much akin to a puzzle. You also have to walk across that same girder. You essentially do the same thing, but it takes longer. Balancing the time spent walking, watching, and fighting is a delicate act, and Final Fantasy VII Remake fumbles it a bit. The time spent fighting isn't a problem though. Final Fantasy VII Remake has one of the best action-based combat systems Square has ever created. It's intuitive, rewarding, and satisfying to learn and master. It uses Square's previous action JRPGs as stepping stones and succeeds where those systems faltered, especially boss fights. While Final Fantasy VII was a turn-based game, being turn-based wasn't one of its signature mechanics. Rather, those mechanics are ATB and Materia, both of which are retained in Final Fantasy VII Remake. Characters require ATB to do any actions outside of their basic or unique attacks. Materia works in the same way as in Final Fantasy VII and even now show up on your weapons and armor. There's even new materia thrown in that focuses on the action part of action RPG. Stuff like an AoE attack after a dodge, ATB boosting upon blocking, allies following up your magic with their magic, and gain ATB upon consecutive ATB attacks between allies. Materia is so great because it encourages and rewards you for playing playing certain ways, and this is exemplified when adapted for an action RPG. ATB and Materia give a lot of flexibility with combinations and builds. Final Fantasy VII Remake doesn't stop there though, it also introduces weapon upgrades and unique weapon abilities. Your weapons have their own unique cores. You unlock more cores as you level up your character's weapon level. The cores host a number of upgrades for that particular weapon, from more damage to more materia slots. This system helps keep all of your weapons viable by endgame. The weapon abilities are unique to each weapon in the game, but if you use that ability enough, you'll unlock that ability for your other weapons. This system encourages you to use all of your weapons before you get comfortable with just one. The game really tries to reward you so you don't stick to one weapon, materia setup, or character. The Buster Sword is such an iconic weapon and even for some has sentimental value, so it's fitting for Final Fantasy VII Remake to keep it viable. Every character has 6 weapons and a myriad of armor and accessories. In Final Fantasy VII, there were no summons in Midgar. You'd get your first one shortly after leaving. Final Fantasy VII Remake brings in a handful of summons into Midgar, and by Wall Market you should have Ifrit, Chocobo and Moogle, and Shiva. Larger summons can only be used in certain fights because of their size, but smaller summons can be used in any fight. Now let's head into Wall Market. A man outside the Honeybee Inn says that Tifa was a candidate to wife Don Corneo. Cloud and Aerith head up to the Don's mansion. The bouncer says men aren't allowed in, so Aerith has the idea to have Cloud dress up as a woman. Cloud and Aerith have to get a hold of a dress and a wig. However, if you want to guarantee Corneo picking Cloud, there are some optional items you can find. While you are given a text choice for Cloud's dress, it doesn't visibly change anything. Following a short series of side quests, Aerith and Cloud find dresses and are able to get inside Corneo's mansion.
Welcome to Wall Market, the pleasure capital of Midgar that's got everything for everybody. Couple, huh? It's all good. Play together, do your own thing, earn a little scratch on the side even. Whatever you're into, we got you. Got a special one-time limited offer.
No, thank you. Come on, Cloud, let's go.
To start, Wall Market itself was significantly inspired by red light districts in Tokyo. It's an area of promiscuous entertainment owned and run by a crime lord and features hotels, nightclubs, bars, restaurants, massage parlors, and so on. Unfortunately, Final Fantasy VII's localization was an extremely rough and likely rushed task handled by one person, so a lot of nuance and references in text were lost. Nevertheless, Wall Market still makes a certain impression on the player even in English. Final Fantasy VII Remake's Wall Market holds the intended red light district vibes and goes about some of its intended themes a little more tastefully. The layout of Wall Market even reflects the intended design better, though there's plenty to love about Final Fantasy VII's pre-rendered background art style. The first difference that hits is the change in music. The theme of Wall Market in Final Fantasy VII Remake is new and gives off a totally different atmosphere. At this point, these two Wall Markets are radically different, more so if you originally played the game in English. Final Fantasy VII Wall Market's theme is still in Final Fantasy VII Remake. It's the theme for these bandits you fight in the Sector 6 collapsed tunnel. A great amount of the music that's been lifted from Final Fantasy VII is done justice, and a few of those tracks are either moved around or repurposed to be more fitting to the tone. There's also a good amount of new compositions as well, some fitting in better than others. So one of the biggest reasons I wanted to tackle Wall Market for this video was because it is the key example of how both of these games handle linearity. While Midgar is rather linear, it has some open-ended areas. The game doesn't direct you on where exactly to go. If the first thing you do is try to head up to the Don's mansion, you won't even get the right cutscene for progress. You have to talk to this guy outside the Honeybee Inn to progress the story. This is common among JRPGs of the time. They wanted you to explore the towns to figure out what to do and where to go. This serves to immerse the player in the location. They then reward you for doing so by giving you extra items for your disguise that guarantees Cloud getting picked. Now, comparatively, Final Fantasy VII Remake is a bit more linear in the sense that many optional parts were put into the main story, and thus you're guided to all of them. Plus, all that supplemental NPC dialogue you would have to explore for is actually still present, but you don't have to walk up to anyone now. When you're near NPCs, their dialogue shows up on the left-hand side. Corneo will also always pick Cloud now, so there's no additional disguise options to find either. The goal of the exploration mission before was to immerse the player in the location. So how does Final Fantasy VII Remake manage to immerse players in Wall Market with its modern approach of UI and quest markers showing you exactly where to go? Well, it is the colorful characters you have to talk to and how much time you spend in the city. Cloud and Aerith not only have to get dresses, but also have to get an invitation into the mansion. And not only does Cloud have the possibility of 3 different dresses, but so do Tifa and Aerith. The dress Tifa wears was dependent on a conversation choice you made back in Sector 7, but you only got that choice if you did all of the side quests there. Then, Aerith's dress is prepared by the new character Madame M, and it's determined by how many side quests you did in Sector 5. Lastly, Cloud's dress is determined by the side quests you do in Wall Market. However, there's 2 routes for the side quests. You can either run errands for Chocobo Sam or Madame M, 2 new characters who flesh out Wall Market. Johnny's also still there, but not for some obtuse reason. Rather, he himself is interested in saving Tifa. Johnny's a good example of a returning minor character, essentially retooled into comic relief, and even having main story relevance rather than just being a background character following the team. Anyways, the route for Chocobo Sam has you visit locations you'll remember from Final Fantasy VII. The dress shop, drunkards, the materia shop, the pharmacy, and the restaurant. The dress shop owner is still drinking away his troubles, now with an explanation as to why. He sends you out on a goose chase through the other familiar locations. The person in the bathroom is also still there and in need of medicine. The materia shop owner wants you to find out what's in the vending machine at the inn. In Final Fantasy VII, it was a protein drink set, except in Japanese, it was a little different. In Final Fantasy VII Remake, he asks you to acquire the sauce.
The sauce.
The sauce?
Stop saying the sauce.
Now, these side quests have an interesting twist to them, where the rewards you get in them can change depending on your materia. So here, what you get out of the vending machine depends on how many enemies you've assessed. At the restaurant, it used to be a place full of people where you got a pharmacy coupon. In Final Fantasy VII Remake, the restaurant's purpose is totally different. Nobody eats there and you have to help figure out why, and your magic materia determines how right your advice will be. The pharmacy remains about the same. In Final Fantasy VII, you simply exchange the coupon for medicine. In Final Fantasy VII Remake, you're asked to deliver medicine, and the level of your cleansing materia determines how many deliveries you'd have to make. This is a great example of repurposing and expanding upon a small bit of Midgar in a story sense, and in a less tedious way. Anyways, now we come to the Honeybee Inn. In Final Fantasy VII, the Honeybee Inn is a brothel, and it's an odd, unsettling location, one toned down even from what it could have been. In Final Fantasy VII Remake, the Honeybee Inn is more akin to a simple, thematic VIP nightclub. There are 3 rooms you can enter and 2 you could peep into. The dressing room is pretty similar, but your makeup isn't done in it anymore. The group room results in a scene of Cloud in a bath with a bunch of buff guys. The bleeped room, in Japanese called the love room, results in Cloud having a breakdown and waking up in bed with a buff guy. If you peep into the rooms, you'll witness an elaborate roleplay session in one room and in the other an innocuous older couple. Meanwhile, in Final Fantasy VII Remake, the Honeybee Inn is now part of the main story. After performing a rhythm minigame, you're rewarded with the dress for Cloud. Now, you still actually can peep into 2 rooms. In one room, you see someone that's really into their massage, and in the other is Palmer with one of the girls. This is interesting because Palmer being in the Honeybee Inn was something cut from the original game. Before we move on to the Dawn's Mansion, this would be a great time to talk about minigames. Final Fantasy is known for its minigames, and Final Fantasy VII had a good amount of them. Final Fantasy VII Remake has a good handful of fleshed out minigames with multiple tiers of challenge, except the rhythm game.
Since you're here, sir, might you favor us with another dazzling performance?
No.
In Wall Market, you'll find the gym where Cloud has to do squats in order to obtain a wig. In Final Fantasy VII Remake, there's not just a squats minigame with different difficulties, but pull-ups as well, also with varying difficulty tiers. The item shop is also still there in the same vein and is still accessible. Machine Gun, the weapon store, is also present and is retained remarkably faithfully in its layout and details. Madame M also brings along with her a new location, a massage parlor, something very fitting of a red light district. Another new location to Wall Market is the Coliseum owned by the Dawn. While fighting here is part of the main story, it also offers side and endgame content. Given how the game is based solely within Midgar, endgame content was brought in. This would be a good point to mention Chadley, who researches materia. He has all sorts of good materia you earn throughout the game, and as well as VR missions with boss fights. So on top of side quests, you've got these 2 avenues for endgame to satiate your desire for combat. along with another similar avenue later in the game. Anyways, back to the Colosseum. One of the required fights is Hell House, who is repurposed from a simple encounter to a boss. There's a number of enemies from the original game that receive this treatment, and it's great. With wacky as heck designs like this, they had some good potential for engaging fights. Hell House has two different forms like it did in Final Fantasy VII, however it's not just a mere stat boost, it is an actual different phase. Hell House also has a unique mechanic where it constantly changes its element, and you've got to be prepared to counter its changing weaknesses. And on top of that, Hell House and the other bosses have more attacks in hard mode. We will return to discussing bosses later when we talk about Abzu. Now, upon approaching the mansion's entrance, we're greeted by Leslie Kyle and two nameless goons. Upon the first visit here, Leslie warns Cloud and Aerith to forget about getting in. Then, upon their return, Leslie is still apprehensive about their desire to get in.
You serious?
Is there a problem?
I hope you know what you're in for.
Leslie, while a new character to the game, actually comes from the novel The Kids Are Alright, a Turk side story, along with Kyrie. In other words, they're actually additions from the compilation. After getting inside Corneo's mansion, they find Tifa in a torture room. In a clever instance of foreshadowing, Cloud is quick to not let Tifa see his face, while Aerith introduces herself. Tifa explains why she's there to interrogate Corneo. So now Tifa, Aerith, and Cloud are the three candidates to marry the Dawn. He picks one and takes them into his bedroom. Shortly after, the other two rush into the room to interrogate Corneo. After spilling the beans about Shinra's plan to drop the plate, he springs a trap, dropping the three into the sewers. Meanwhile, Corneo is wanted by Shinra for telling them the plan, so he leaves Wall Market.
Hey, can you hear me?
Tifa?
Yes?
You okay? Good.
Wait a minute. Cloud? Is that you? Oh my god, that makeup! And that dress!
Nailed it, I know, thank you. Moving on.
The Dawn's mansion is remarkably faithful in its aesthetic. The layout is identical besides an extra room that is provided between the torture room stairs and its door. Don Corneo is the crime lord of Wall Market, and his title is more relevant throughout Final Fantasy VII Remake. Chocobo Sam, Andrea Rodea, and Madame M are in charge of scouting out candidates for him. Corneo knocks his bridal candidates unconscious before throwing them into the torture room. Along with more insight further in the game, we learn how vile Corneo really is firsthand. Corneo did have further development in Final Fantasy VII, though not until you got to Wutai. Similarly, other main characters see development and some backstory as well that they didn't have in Midgar previously, including the characters that don't actually leave Midgar. This doesn't cover everyone though. For example, Sephiroth's humanity is largely unexplored, and how Barrett is written focuses a lot more on his ideals and philosophies. The entire Nibelheim incident isn't shown, and there's not a hint of dying anywhere. It's very likely though that these things will just be tackled at the same time as they were in Final Fantasy VII. But this again is why I say Final Fantasy VII Remake should be treated as a separate entity. It'd almost be expected of you to know what happened to Sephiroth and Barrett before playing this game, since the game isn't going to tell you their full story despite being a full game because it's not really relevant at that point yet. There isn't any option for who Corneo will pick anymore. Due to Cloud's rude mouth, he will always pick him, while Tifa and Aerith are taken into the lackey's room. And due to Corneo divulging Shinra's plans to drop the plate, they're actually able to save some residents of Sector 7. This gives the Dawn a more dire reason to actually be on the run from Shinra, since in Final Fantasy VII, him divulging the plans didn't lead to anyone being saved other than Marlene. When you awaken the sewers, you have the option to first get an item, but then you can either check on Tifa or Aerith. This is one of several choices in Final Fantasy VII that decide who you later can take on a date in the Gold Saucer. Your choices were Aerith, Tifa, Yuffie, or Barrett. Anyways, after checking on someone, you have to fight Apps. Apps' key attack is the Sewer Tsunami. It does some decent damage to you, but it also hurts him depending on the direction the tsunami comes from. Apps is also weak to fire, and your reward for beating him is a Phoenix Down.
Where in the... Damn, it reeks.
In Final Fantasy VII Remake, this choice of who to talk to, along with a number of choices from Final Fantasy VII, are retained. The end result isn't a date at the Gold Saucer, though. Instead, your choices determine who you will talk to in an important cutscene later in the game. In Final Fantasy VII, you fight Apps. In Final Fantasy VII Remake, you fight Abzu. Abzu is the proper name for this guy. Apps was a translation mistake, much like Midgar Zalem, who we can expect to be called Midgarsimer in the future. Abzu is also weak to fire. If you cast fire on him, it can interrupt him and he will jump into the water to get rid of it. Sewer Tsunami returns, though Abzu jumps out of the way, and you have to keep an eye out on where the tsunami comes from, otherwise you'll suffer severe damage. Abzu also has horns that you can attack now, and the intro cutscene makes sure that we see that they are Mako infused. Final Fantasy VII Remake takes every chance to make sure you understand how Mako is used in this world. It's an important world building detail, and you get a Phoenix Dow when you beat him. This whole fight is a great example of how bosses are fleshed out and ultimately the most fun and challenging enemies to fight in the game. Brute forcing a boss is the least viable option, and you're rewarded tremendously for using strategy, and rewarded even further if you manage to just break the system. Positioning is important, as is building the stagger meter, capitalizing on moments where the enemy is pressured, elemental weaknesses, weak spots, breakable parts, adapting to multiple phases, and so on. Regular encounters make less use of these things, but every boss fight pushes a new tactic or uses these mechanics in a different way. Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy VII Remake are their own games of different eras. Final Fantasy VII was a groundbreaking game at the time and led to the careers of many game developers today. It was a bold direction for the franchise. Once you get out of the city of Midgar, you have an entire planet to explore full of diverse locations, enemies, and an entire story ready to unfold. The turn-based combat itself is not much to write home about, but materia customization is one of the best systems Final Fantasy has ever done. It's a versatile system that can be balanced or carefully exploited to your advantage. Final Fantasy VII Remake blends in among modern games, but it certainly shines in some areas, particularly its combat. It's engaging, engrossing, and it retains the materia system while adding on top of it. While it does focus on one location, it's arguably the most iconic location in the franchise. Final Fantasy VII had no need to focus on Midgar for that long, but there was potential, and that was pretty evident by the compilation. It brings in mid-game and endgame content as well as complete character development among a handful of new characters within the confines of the city. The game does still technically end on a cliffhanger though, with a number of plot points to look forward to in the next game. Without touching spoilers, the game is intended to be treated as a separate, additional entity to the original game. Now, maybe one day we can address the final act of this game, but I don't think that day is anytime soon. I've been infatuated with Final Fantasy VII for the last few months, and I'm ready to take a break from it. So that's all I got for today. More videos are coming up soon, hopefully. You can find me on Twitter and support me via Patreon if you'd like. And until next time, thank you for watching.